Got warm, delicious hot dogs here. Get them while they're fresh. Hot dog. Where have you been?
I got me some nachos.
I thought we were going to sell hot dogs. We committed to the pastor we were going to sell hot dogs at the ball game.
Nobody's buying hot dogs. They're all down at the nacho stand because they are so good. Good.
So I guess we should just go down to the nacho stand and leave the hot dogs?
Well, I don't know. They're pretty good.
Babe,
Do you want?
we committed to managing the hot dog stand. I'm going to stay here till this game is over selling hot dogs. You do whatever you want to do. I'm committed to the hot dogs. Hot dogs.
I'll be right back.
Hot. You going to get more sauce? Hot dogs. Hot dogs.
H-O-T, D-O-G, come by dunk some Steve and me.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks, babe.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.
That's incredible. Thanks for helping me. Thanks for coming to my aid. You know what?
What?
You're incredibly hot right now.
Yeah, these things are incredibly hot, but I'm committed.
No. I mean, you're incredibly hot right now, babe. I'm very much in love with you.
Oh, stop.
Hey folks, I'm Steve Chapman and I'm with Rising Above Ministries. My wife Lori and I have been married for 25 years. We have 5 kids and we have 2 children with special needs. Did you realize that every year around the world there are 26 million arranged marriages? I was kind of surprised when I heard that number. I always thought arranged marriages was something that was from an era long ago and far away. But the truth of the matter is, arranged marriages make up the majority of marriages globally. As a matter of fact, 55% of all marriages in the world are arranged marriages. Well, where did the idea for an arranged marriage come from? Well, actually, it came from the Bible. If you think all the way back to the very beginning, when God created the universe and everything that He created, God looked at it and it says that He saw that it was good. And then He ended creation with sort of His masterpiece when He created man and He breathed into him the breath of life. And He looked at man and He said, "This is very good." But then at some point He looked at the man and He said, "There's something that's not good." And what He said was not good was that the man was alone. He said Adam couldn't find a helper suitable for him. And so what did God do? God arranged a mate for Adam. He put Adam to sleep, took a rib from his side, and He created woman. And the Bible says God brought the woman to the man. That's an arranged marriage. God created her, she was His daughter, and then He brought her to the man. And Adam received Eve as his wife, and he gave his famous line of, "This is now bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." But then the Bible goes on to say in Genesis that for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, and he will cling to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, I'm not advocating that we return to arranged marriages necessarily, but it's interesting to realize that arranged marriages are still very predominant in our world today. As a matter of fact, the majority of them. But here's the thing that stands out to me the most. When you look at the divorce rate among arranged marriages, the divorce rate is less than 7%. When you compare that to the divorce rate for all other marriages, which hovers around 45 to 50%, that's a pretty significant difference. Why is that? Why do arranged marriages that most of us in America would feel like that seems so foreign to us? Why are those marriages, why are they significantly less likely to end in divorce? Well, it really comes down to what is the emphasis in an arranged marriage. The emphasis or the priority of an arranged marriage is commitment. You start out with commitment. You may or may not be in love with this person. You may or may not even be attracted necessarily to that person, but you are committed to the idea and the institution of marriage and what that means and what that entails. And you hope that eventually you grow into love with this person. And studies show and history shows that most of the time that actually does happen. Of course, there's always outliers and it's not always the case, but most of the time they learn to love each other. Whereas in other marriages, and what most of us probably did in our own relationships, we started dating, which really became popular in post-World War II culture. We started dating and we decided, do I like this person or not? Do I want to pursue this anymore? And we're looking for love. And that then, once we feel like we are in love with someone, then we'll choose to get married. You know, it's the whole idea that we used to say as kids, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes Susie and a baby carriage, you know. And that's sort of the way we look at it. But with arranged marriages, they first start with commitment to be married. You will be married. And whether it's your family or the community that helps bring that together, you're committed to being married. In most of our culture today, we are searching for our soulmate. But what happens with that ideology is that a lot of times when our marriage gets hard, and for most of you, like my wife and I, raising special needs children, marriage gets hard. We didn't count on this. We didn't see this coming. And so sometimes we're blindsided by the challenges that raising children with special needs brings to our life, especially to our marriage. And so what happens a lot of times is we find ourselves no longer happy in our marriage. And sometimes we start believing this lie that, you know what, maybe I didn't find my soulmate. Maybe you're not my soulmate. Well, I want to tell you, my personal conviction is this: you don't find your soulmate, you become a soulmate. And that's where I think arranged marriages actually have an advantage, and that is they start with commitment being the foundation. If you've ever spent any time in a vineyard, what you'll notice is that grapevines don't just grow and run aimlessly along the ground like you oftentimes see in a pumpkin patch. If grapevines are allowed just to kind of grow aimlessly on the ground, they don't usually thrive. So what you'll find in any vineyard is you'll find a trellis system, and those vary from vineyard to vineyard. But the trellis is in place so that it literally puts those vines in the optimal position to flourish and to grow and ultimately produce that delicious fruit we call grapes. Well, if you think about it in marriage, commitment is very much like that trellis. Without commitment in a marriage, love will eventually wither and falter and will become unhappy. But if we start with commitment, and we're committed to this person, commitment allows that love to grow and flourish. Commitment allows that love to grow into something that's very, very special, very, very important. You know, it's interesting when you study divorce rates and why people get divorced. Most people simply say, well, I'm just not happy. But then if you press in and say, well, why are you not happy? In most studies, in most research, what they say the number one reason couples get divorced is lack of commitment. It's also funny to realize that one study showed that it was also the number one reason that most couples agreed was their problem. Yeah, we just have a lack of commitment. Which totally supports the whole idea that without commitment, our love is going to wither, our happiness is going to fade, and ultimately our marriage is going to falter, and we're going to find ourselves in a position, if we've decided that love is the most important thing, and if we feel like I'm not in love anymore, then we're going to start looking for the door. And of course, we've made divorce and getting out of marriage so easy today. But it hasn't always been that way. You know, Jesus was asked one time in Matthew chapter 19, they came to him and they said, is it okay for men to get divorced for any reason? Because Moses had allowed us to do this. But Jesus literally reiterated what God had said all the way back in Genesis. He says, don't you remember, haven't you read that in the beginning, God created male and female? And he tells the story of how, and God brought the woman to the man, and he said, for this reason, a man will leave his mother and father, cling to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, reiterating what God had already established in the garden. But then Jesus adds something. He finishes that answer by saying, and he says, therefore, what God has brought together, let no man separate. Jesus is challenging us and encouraging us to stay committed. It's not necessarily about being happy, because none of us are going to be happy all the time. There's going to be challenges. We're going to face difficulties. I tell young couples when I do pre-marriage counseling all the time that they have no context for what the next 10, 20 years may hold for them. They can't imagine not being as in love and happy as they are right now. The truth of the matter is, most young couples that started to get married really have no concept of what love is. They just really, really like each other. And the truth of the matter is, it's oftentimes very selfish. And the truth of the matter is, I like the way I feel when I'm with you. And a lot of times in our culture today, couples have already decided to be sexually intimate. And so when we're sexually intimate, the way God has designed our bodies, I call it the happy hormones flood our brains, things like oxytocin and dopamines, and they make us feel something that may not be true. They make us feel safe and connected to this person, but yet if we've not really committed our whole life to this person, that may be a false security there. So we need to kind of start with and say, hey, am I committed in this marriage? And so I don't know where you find yourself today. You're saying, well, Steve, we're already married, so we didn't maybe start there. But I don't know where you're at. Well, let me ask you just to do something. Take just a minute and let's kind of evaluate our relationships. This may just be you and your spouse watching this. You may be in a small group. You may be in a church setting. But let's take just a minute and I want you to evaluate right now, where is your marriage? Let's take a scale of 1 to 9. 9 being, man, our marriage is really, really good. We're happy. We're healthy. We love each other. Now, we're not perfect. We're not a 10. Nobody's going to get there in this life. But we're good. Let's say 4, 5, and 6, we're okay. Maybe we're surviving but not thriving. And then 1, 2, and 3, we're in serious trouble. We're unhappy. We're not healthy. We're stressed. We're tired. We're frustrated. So take just a minute there in your mind. And if you want to talk with your spouse about it, that's fine. But in your mind, where do you see your marriage? Put your marriage on that scale. Because I'm not sure where you're at. But I know this. No matter where you're at, your marriage can improve. Even if it's in that lower third, your marriage can improve. And throughout this series, we're going to talk about some of the key components to having a healthy, happy marriage. And I'm so glad you've chosen to walk through this with us. And that's why we've chosen to start this series with commitment and the importance of being committed. I want to encourage you, if you're in that lower third, if you've thought about maybe we just need to separate, maybe we would be happier apart, I want to encourage you that that's a lie. And I can back it up with some evidence. There's research that shows most unhappy couples don't stay unhappy forever. There was a study done in 2002 that they interviewed couples and they placed them just like we did in that spectrum. And here's what they found. They found couples that rated their marriage in the very lowest tier. I mean, they were unhappy, unhealthy, but they chose to stay together. Of those couples, 77% were happy 5 years later. 77%, almost 8 out of 10 of those couples that chose to stay together, chose to stay committed, even though they weren't happy, found themselves happy 5 years later when they followed up. Compared to that same group in that bottom third that chose to divorce, 5 years later, only 50% reported being happier. That's a pretty significant difference from nearly 80% to 50%. And what the researchers say with that is that if we'll choose to stay committed, the truth of the matter is we can learn to become happy and healthy again. Most researchers agree couples don't stay unhappy and unhealthy forever. Commitment is that trellis that allows our love and our marriage to grow and thrive. So what exactly does that look like? Well, let me show you what I think it looks like. That trellis, when you plant that vine, it sort of begins to grow. And that first rung, where many of you may be right now, that first rung is hope. Some of you just really need to hear that there is hope for your marriage. You may be sitting there right now thinking, I can't imagine us ever being happy again. But think about something. There was also a time when the opposite was true, that you could never have imagined not being happy with this person, but yet you did. You became unhappy. So the reverse can also be true. Even if you can't imagine that you could ever be happy again, you can. I tell couples all the time that that's the biggest lie you usually have to overcome when you're in an unhealthy place, is that you could ever be healthy and happy again. You totally can. You can become healthy again. I read this one particular stat all the time, usually in articles and on websites, and they talk about how that married couples who are raising individuals with special needs have the highest divorce rates among all marriages. They quote numbers like 80, 90%. I began to press in and study that, and what I found was, while you'll find that number touted in articles and interviews all over the internet, when you begin to look for the research to support it, it's actually not there. The truth of the matter is, When they do research, what they find is that there's not a significant difference between the divorce rates of individuals raising children with special needs and those with just neurotypical kids. Truth of the matter is, for married couples who are raising individuals with Down syndrome specifically, their divorce rates are significantly lower than the average. So that should give you hope. What I'm trying to say to you is this: if you feel like, and maybe you've been told, man, it's so hard having kids with special needs, and so therefore it's a death sentence to your marriage, that's simply not true. There is hope for your marriage, even if you're struggling today. There is always hope. So I want to encourage you, that may be where you have to start, just saying, we have hope. And here's why you have hope. It's the next rung on the trellis. You have hope because there's help. There is always help available, even for a struggling marriage. There's help available for that marriage that's in the middle, that's just kind of surviving. There's help for that marriage that maybe is in that top tier to get even better. There's always help. If you're in a local church, reach out to your pastor, your pastor's wife. Maybe there's a marriage ministry in your church. Talk to the leaders. Maybe there's an older couple that has a good, healthy marriage. Reach out to them. There's Christian counselors and marriage therapists in your communities across the country. Reach out and get help. If you find yourself in a situation and you're like, Steve, I don't know where to turn to, I'm not in a local church and we've done this and this, then you reach out to us here at Rising Above Ministries. Go to our website, contact us. We will help you find help for your marriage, because help is available. And here's what happens when you get help. It takes you to that next level of the trellis, which is habits. When you get help, they're going to help you learn some good habits. Most of our problem in our marriages is we have bad habits. Most people would say, man, our marriage is struggling because we got special needs children, and you just don't know how hard and difficult it is. Or we've got an unhealthy marriage because of this or because of this. The truth of the matter is, guys, your children with special needs are not the reason your marriage is struggling. Most likely it's because you and your spouse have developed some bad habits that aren't growing your marriage in a healthy manner. A lot of times what I see in special needs couples is that the mom embraces the challenge quicker than the dad, and so she just throws herself into this child and studying the diagnosis and figuring out what can I do to help my child and give them the best possible scenario. And sometimes she does that to the exclusion of the dad. And for us dads, here's the deal. We are fixers by nature. And all of a sudden, we come along and we have a special needs child and we can't fix this. We can't make this better, and our dreams are shattered. And studies have recently shown that 26% of dads experience postpartum depression. We think that's just something that moms experience, but 26% of dads experience postpartum depression. And so you got a dad here who's struggling. He can't fix this situation, and so dads typically tend to throw themselves into work at their place of business or work around the house, fixing things, doing stuff. If you've got neurotypical kids, we're going to divide and conquer. And so we just throw ourselves in, and it really divides our marriage. And that's a bad habit. We're not talking together, hanging out together, praying together, playing together. We're not parenting together. That's a bad, unhealthy habit. Sometimes we get so busy and it can be very demanding, and so we let our health, we let our diet go to bad places, and we have bad habits in what we're eating. When we get help, it's going to help us find some good habits. Good habits, and here's how the trellis just continues to help that vine of love and healthy marriage goes. Good habits are going to lead us to healthy marriages. There was a marriage ministry down in Florida several years ago that was given a grant to help struggling couples who were raising kids with special needs. And what they found was that of these couples whose marriages were struggling, that were willing to commit to 12 hours, just 12 hours of marriage counseling and therapy, 80% of those marriages that were struggling saw significant improvements that were sustained a year later. Help is available. It'll teach you some good habits. The good habits bring about good health in your relationship. And here's the thing. When our relationship starts getting healthy because we're practicing some good habits, we're learning to forgive, we're learning to rekindle the romance and spend time together, we're learning to do the right things that we need to be doing in our marriage, and our marriage gets healthy, guess what comes? It's a natural byproduct. When that vine is allowed to grow up that trellis, and it's put in the optimal position to grow and flourish, eventually you walk through that vineyard and there's this beautiful fruit. And that's what happens in our marriages when we allow that commitment to be the trellis, to allow our relationship to grow, and it grows, and we get help, and we start practicing good habits. Our marriages get healthy, and when our marriages get healthy, they get happy. the fruit begins to ripen and blossom on that vine. And we actually find ourselves enjoying one another like we used to years ago. But it really starts with being committed to stay married to the person we're with, to get help, to start practicing the good habits that are going to lead to good health, that are ultimately going to make us happy with one another again. You know, one of my favorite movies is Apollo 13, and I love the whole Apollo 13 story. These astronauts get up on this mission and it kind of goes awry. They run into complications. They have to move into this small capsule to survive. And now Mission Control has to figure out how to get them safely back to Earth. And in the movie, there's this scene where basically the CO2 levels are increasing and they got to change the filters. But all they have are square filters, and they've got to figure out a way to get a square filter into a round slot. So they bring in the engineers and they dump out these boxes and say, this is all those astronauts have on that ship right now. And we've got to figure out a way to get that square filter into this whole cylinder using just this stuff. And the engineers start dividing the stuff out, and one says, hey, better bring in a cup of coffee, we're going to be here a while. And the implication is, gentlemen, failure is not an option. We have to figure this out. And of course, eventually they did, and they got those guys back. We need to get to a place in our marriages, even when they're struggling, that we say failure or divorce is not an option. We are committed to marriage. We may not be happy, we may not feel in love, but failure is not an option. You know, it's interesting that most marriage therapists will tell you that as long as divorce is on the table, it's really, really hard for couples to improve and get better. We need to take it off the table. And that may seem like a hard thing to do right now because you just don't feel it. But the truth of the matter is, therapists will tell you, sometimes you have to practice what is right and the feelings will follow. We have to say, we're going to be committed to this marriage. We chose to. At one point, you stood in front of a pastor and friends and family and said, for better, for worse, for richer, for poor, sickness and health, till death do us part, or something like that. You made a commitment. Honor that commitment. I tell couples all the time, I truly believe your greatest potential to truly be happy is with the person you're currently with. Now, sure, there's outliers, there's incredible situations, but for the most part, help is available. Most couples will tell you, we've tried everything we know to do, but the truth of the matter is there's probably still a lot of things you haven't tried. There is hope for your marriage. You can get help. You can develop good habits that are going to lead to a healthy relationship that ultimately is going to bring happiness into your marriage. Failure does not have to be an option. Take it off the table. Be committed to this idea of marriage. Get the help that you need. And I believe what you'll see is the reality that God is for you, and He's going to come alongside of you, and He's going to help you grow into a healthy marriage. Commitment truly matters. And if we can begin to marriage that high level of commitment we see in arranged marriage with the high desire for love and finding our soulmate that we see in all other marriages, I think that's a win-win situation. That's what we're praying for you, and that's what we're hoping you'll do. I hope you'll take some time to dig into those discussion questions, and you and your spouse will just take some time to talk about what's our commitment level, how are we doing with that, and what do we need to do? And I hope that you'll hold on to that hope and just begin to let your marriage grow up that trellis of commitment and get yourself to a healthy, happy place. That's our prayer for you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paul.
And I am Stephanie.
We've been married for 18 years. Been together since 2001.
Yep.
I actually met at work, which was cool. We have 2 children that are in their teens, 13 and 15.
We dated for 2 years, got engaged. We're engaged for 2 years before we got married. And then we had our first son about a week after we celebrated our 3rd anniversary. And everything with him seemed perfectly fine at the beginning. So we had no issues or concerns with him. And then we had our daughter when Keegan was 2. So we had Katie in 2010. And right off the bat, we knew something wasn't quite right. She was behind from day one. And we didn't get a diagnosis with her until she was about 2. And they told us she had autism, and it was pretty devastating at first. And then at the same time, Keegan, when he was in kindergarten, his teachers had called us in for a meeting and were telling us that they thought he was behind and they wanted to do some testing on him, and so they did, and they were like, we think he has autism too, which in hindsight, that was actually almost more devastating, I think.
Yeah, it was more devastating because we felt that he was our more normal child.
Or typical child.
Typical.
Kids is a typical and our special needs child. So when they told us that, no, both your kids are special needs, it was just like the bottom fell out of my world, and it was just like, how do we handle this? So,
But no, it was very difficult. We're originally from up north in northern Illinois, and we went through a lot of different bigger hospitals, universities, to try and really track down what this was all about. And it just broke our hearts even more, and it kind of made me get a little distant. I was working in retail at the time, and would work 80 hours a week. I would be gone for 3 days at a time. I wouldn't be around. Whenever I do decide to come home, I chose to go out and do something else. So it was, I basically kind of shut the door and decided not to do that in my own head.
Yeah, it was hard. I was a stay-at-home mom since Keegan turned 1, and so I handled everything, and then he worked a lot, and financially we were not in a good place at that point, so he needed to work, or we felt he needed to work, and so I handled everything with the kids. And then when Katie was doing therapy, she was in therapy I think 4 or 5 days a week. We had 5 different therapies that she was doing. So even if I had wanted to work, there was no feasible way for me to work, just because her therapies were changing all the time. So I was at home doing my thing with the kids, and he was at work doing his thing at work. And then when he would come home, he was a manager at Home Depot. And so he would come home and step into the house and try to manage everything at the house. But at the same time, he didn't know how we functioned. So that was causing a lot of friction and tension between us, on top of the financial stress that we were going through, all of that of me knowing what the kids needed and everything else, and then him coming in and trying to step in our toes, and him and I arguing all the time over, everything. It didn't matter what it was, we argued all the time. We did not communicate with each other at all.
And then I lost my job. And after I lost my job, God broke me. And then shortly after that, we did a marriage, marriage counseling, a marriage discipleship, 16-week discipleship at the church. And man, it opened my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, we had gotten better with certain things. Finances had gotten a little bit better. There had been many a times when we were up north that I think we both had discussed, we didn't discuss it with each other, but I know I had threatened divorce many a times. I never thought I'd actually go through with it because honestly, at the end of the day, I didn't really think I had a legitimate reason. Even though we weren't going to church very often, and he was working too much to ever go to church, I did not think that, for me, divorce is, you gotta have some really, really big stuff going on for that. And I didn't think we had a legitimate reason for divorce. I always kind of felt that things could get better and that they would get better. We just had to figure out how to get to that point. And when we had moved, we sold our house. That had kind of helped pay off some debt and whatnot. We got ourselves into some more debt later on, but caused some other issues, but we managed to work our way through that, and we are in a better place now financially. But the class we had taken was re-engage.
Yep.
And the biggest thing I can take out of that class, well, there's several things.
We had to rate our marriage before we started the class, and I couldn't rate it.
I rated it 6.5. It's supposed to be 1 to 10.
Yeah, I couldn't rate it.
And I couldn't give it a 7, but I didn't think it was all that bad. And then we weren't supposed to share with each other where we were at, and he shared at the end of class that he couldn't even put down anything. And I was like, how could you not put something down? I'm like, did you think we were that bad? But, looking back, I could understand him thinking we might have been, because I used to threaten divorce. I never told him that I never meant it, but it was kind of like a little dig that I would put in there once in a while. So it makes sense that he thought that I would divorce him. But through the class, we really learned what communication was, what it looks like, how that pertains to your entire marriage, whether it's finances, your kids, everything. And we realized how poor we were at communication. We never talked to each other about anything. And so once we kind of figured out how to communicate appropriately and how not to yell, and
More or
mutual
less.
understanding, and honestly, grace, learning what grace was a big thing for me, because I did a lot of blaming him for everything, when at the end of the day, it was just as much me as it was him. But we were both so lost in our own heads that we couldn't even talk to each other about it. But now we're at that point where there's nothing that I can't talk to him about and think that he's going to think less of me. I can talk to him about anything, which is why I've been talking to him more about feelings I've had years ago, but it's taken me a while to kind of be comfortable to share those things.